Hi guys, and welcome back to another Thursday. Sorry about the video quality if you are watching this on YouTube or watching the podcast on like Spotify or whatever. I'm recording this early Thursday morning, right before I post because I had a very, very, very busy week, and this is the only opportunity I've had to do this. This week is the 1965 movie, The Sound of Music. I'm really, really excited about this one this week. I had not watched this since I was like a kid, and there's so much on this movie that I didn't appreciate when I was like 8 years old. You're just watching and kind of you don't understand the world as much, so just sort of enjoying the songs. And this is such a feel-good movie at the end. I love it. It was so good. It made me cry several times. I think this movie has like the reputation of being like ooey gooey, sticky sweet, and it is for sure in a lot of parts. But this film doesn't get the credit for the amount of depth that it has. This film, given everything that's going on right now in the world, I think is very, very topical. For those of you who don't know, this film is a love story, but it is set on the backdrop of 1938 Austria during Anschluss, which is the annexing of Austria by Germany, by the Nazi regime in the Third Reich under Hitler, and the like looming threat of that happening through the earlier to mid part of the film, and the resistance of the main character, or one of them, Captain Von Trapp, and his unwillingness to buckle to the Third Reich is an ongoing B story within the film, which is very topical given how we've had a lot of conversations here in Canada about being the 51st, given the comments that Donald Trump has made. It's very similar to that. Obviously, World War II is always something that I'm like rather interested in, especially given these times now, because history has the tendency to repeat itself. And I'm a firm believer that if you do not learn and remember the mistakes of the past, you will make them again in the future, which is what we're seeing globally right now. What really touched my heart. I have a special, special place for World War II movies, particularly World War II civilian resistance movies. And for those of you that haven't gone back and listened to my episode on Inglourious Bastards, I talked about that there. My great grandmother was in Denmark at the time of World War II when Nazi officers became occupying in there, and the actual house that she was working at was used as a Nazi sort of base where they do a lot of their plannings and meetings. And she was a maid there, and she was what was called a freedom fighter. So she would overhear the things that the Nazis would say, any plans that they have, and she would communicate those to the Allies at great risk to her own personal safety. She was 14 at the time that she started doing this, which I think is so brave. And so the people that she knew, and one of the greatest risks was not only would they hurt your family, but the punishment at the time that she was the most scared of was that the Nazis would cut open your stomach and let rats gnaw at your intestines, and you take a very, very long time to die. I think it's a good reminder to all of us that you always have a choice on what you're going to do, and that you don't have to just go with something, that you always have a choice to resist. And you don't need to just buckle to ideals and lay down and take it when it comes to this, and to use our voices and use what resources we have to resist regimes like that. And, we're seeing, just like in this film, when there's lots of Austrians that choose to do nothing, choose to not stand up, or choose to join and conform with the Nazis, and instead of resisting and doing what is brave and doing what is right. This film had like a personal connection. I felt a lot about my great grandmother during this film while watching it. And of course, they enjoyed the songs and all the other, A plot storylines as well. This film's very, very well done. And it's definitely, there's a reason it's a classic for sure. This is definitely a Hollywood reimagining of this story. I'm not going to go into the historical accuracies of the actual Von Trapp family, because this is based on the musical, which is like sort of based on the book as well. So I'm just going to go into like some of the other ones, especially because this is a 3-hour movie. So I just have a little bit more to say on stuff. The fictional version of the story of Maria, the Von Trapp family, and their escape from Austria during onslaughts. It is on the American Film Institute's 100 movies of all time. It's number 55, and on the musical list, it's number 4. And it has 3 songs on its 100 Years, 100 Songs list. In 2001, it was preserved in the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So let's get into pre-production. Initially, the story was made by German filmmakers in 1956, and the sequel was produced as well. They were both very, very successful, and both the highest grossing and most successful German films ever made at the time. 1956, the rights were purchased by Paramount, who intended to cast Audrey Hepburn in the lead as Maria. Ultimately, this fell through, but one of its producers, Chin Donahue, who's going to be the intended director, decided to adapt it into the play. Richard Roger and Oscar Hammerstein composed the music, and the musical was born. They ran on Broadway for 1,500 performances and won 6 Tonys. In 1960, Fox purchased the film rights and began to develop the film. The president at the time was Richard Zanuck. Ernest Lehman wrote the screenplay, basing it on the stage musical and the memoirs. He cut out the songs and rearranged other sequences from the play in order to make it more of a film adaptation and not just filming stationary sets like you would when you're watching a play. So when selecting a director, their first choice was West Side Story director Robert Wise, but at the time he was unavailable. Many directors actually turned down the opportunity to direct this film, including Gene Kelly, Vincent Donahue, the original intended director, and Stanley Donen. Screenwriter Ernest Lehman then invited William Wyler to see the Broadway play, and he absolutely hated it, but eventually was talked into directing the film. And then Lehman sort of had buyer's regret after this and felt like he wasn't going to do the film justice. And so he secretly sent a copy to Robert Wise, and he read it. Wyler had another opportunity for a different movie to direct while they were sort of getting all their ducks in a row, and this would have delayed the production. So Zanuck, the studio head, told him to take the opportunity, and then he and Lehman began to pursue Robert Wise pretty heavily, whose other film was then delayed, and so he had the availability and agreed to direct. So Wyler's out, Wise is in. Wise then revised the script. He wanted to tone down the overly sweet stuff of the stage musical, and then they had added 2 additional songs for the film. So casting, Maria Von Trapp, or eventually Von Trapp, spoilers, was played by the iconic Julie Andrews. It doesn't get better than Julie Andrews, guys. She's coming fresh off a Oscar win for Mary Poppins. Lehman only wanted her. She was initially unsure due to the overly sweetness of the musical. She was always also quite concerned about this. But upon hearing that this was the director, Robert Wise's concerns as well, she agreed to do the film. Captain Von Trapp is played by Christopher Plummer, who's unbelievably good in this film, unbelievably good in everything he's in. But considerations that were made were Sean Connery. I can't even imagine what that would be like. I don't think he's a very good actor, guys. Richard Burton, who is harsh in everything, but not in a harsh and redeeming way at all. I don't know. Have you seen Cleopatra? He's not good. And Bing Crosby, who I think would have been way too old at this point. Plus, I don't think he has the acting ability to bring the depth that Christopher Plummer gave. Robert Wise really, really wanted Christopher Plummer, but he turned it down initially. He was kind of a serious stage actor at this time, and so he wasn't really interested, but he agreed to do it if they reworked the script and Captain Von Trapp's character in order to give him sort of a more well-rounded and deeper character development through the movie. Peggy Wood plays Mother Abbess, one of the nuns. Eleanor Parker plays the Elsa, who's Baroness. Richard Hayden played Max Deltwiller. And the children, I'm not going to go into all of them. There's 7. They're played by some kids. You could look it up. But many child stars at the time were considered, including Kurt Russell, Terry Garr, and Mia Farrow. So top top tier child stars, guys. So for production, principal photography was done on sound stages in LA, and then the crew actually did go to the town of Salzburg, which is where it's really set for shooting, and mountain shots of Maria was shot in Bavaria. So reception of this film, initially mixed reviews criticizing its sweet tone. Robert Wise later, when doing interviews, said, "Intellectual papers and magazines destroyed us, but local papers gave us great reviews." It was one of the most commercially successful films of all time. It remained #1 at the box office for 30 weeks, which is insane. Now we see much more short times in theaters. Theaters are far less successful than they were in terms of length than they were in 1965, but 30 weeks is astounding. It earned $266 million on an $8 million budget. So just some quick kind of conversion, best I could do, is it on a $79 million budget, it made 2.6 billion with a B dollars. Soundtrack remained on the top 10 of the Billboard charts for 2 years and the top 200 for 4.5 years following the release of this film. So this film was nominated for a number of Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Robert Wise, Best Actress for Julie Andrews, Best Supporting Actress for Peggy Wood, Best Art Direction and Color, Best Cinematography and Color, Best Editing, Best Score, and Best Sound. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Editing, Scoring, and Sound. This film is excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. There's a whole lot of documentaries and magazine articles and different things you can read on The Sound of Music. I highly recommend those. I could be here forever in a day if I wanted to talk about pre-production. So I'm going to get right into the plot today. So the film opens up in 1938. There's amazing, gorgeous shots kind of going through the field in the town of Salzburg, and then we open up to Maria in her iconic line where she's spinning in the field singing "The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music." After Maria finishes this song, she remembers that she is late for a meeting with the other nuns at the abbey, and she sort of drops everything. She's very clumsy and sprints. It's pretty clear right away that Maria is this free spirit that isn't really gelling with the rules of the abbey and being a part of a convent. As she races back, she's barreling through, and all the other nuns are kind of waiting for her, and they are not impressed. This is when they sing "How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria?" They are very concerned. A lot of these nuns are very old school, very conservative, and Maria is positive. She has a really hard time kind of containing any thought or self-regulating. She's very sweet. She's very funny. She's very silly. And this is kind of goes against a lot of that conservative kind of nun-typical thought line and stereotypes in which you would think about a nun. I don't know if any of you think about nuns very often, but my family on one side is Irish Catholic, all the way back. And they all attended Catholic school, all taught by nuns. And I have heard horrific stories about how brutal the nuns were and how serious and humorless they were. So I don't know if that reflects modern nuns, but from the stories I've heard from my childhood about nuns, these nuns are much more closer to what I picture as a nun than someone like Maria. And so they sing the song "How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria?" while they discuss sort of her lack of discipline while Mother Abbess is defending her. And there's a couple of lines from the song that Mother Abbess sings that I love that just capture the free spiritness of Maria. And they are, "How do you keep a wave upon the sand? How do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you hold a moonbeam in your hand?" And I think this sort of captures Maria's inability to be sort of contained. We've used it through this very special kind of magical lens. That this is actually not something that we should be concerned about with Maria. Maybe she isn't a fit here, but she is a fit for something, and maybe that something is bigger. So it's a little bit of foreshadowing. So after this, Maria is then called to Mother Abbess's office, and they kind of discuss her desires to be a nun. Maria talks a lot about being raised on the mountains and looking down at the abbey and always having a desire to be there, particularly through hearing the nuns sing. It was a real draw to her. But she talks about some of the criticism she receives from the other nuns, and this is a line that I think is so funny. She said, "You know how Sister Bertha always makes me kiss the floor after we've had a disagreement? Well, lately I've taken to kissing the floor whenever she sees me coming just to save time," which is funny. It just sort of sums up Maria's personality that I think is so great. So Mother Abbess decides that while she's sort of considering before she takes her vows, that she should go and work as a governess to the 7 children of the Von Trapp family Captain Von Trapp is a retired naval officer and a widower. His wife has died, and they have had many, many governesses. I think it's 12 come in and out in the last little while, and they need some. So the name of the kids are Liesel, Friedrich, Louisa, Gitta, Marta, and Gretel. Sorry, I butchered those German names. This is when Maria walks through the town. We see a lot of the really iconic shots. You can actually go to this town and kind of do like a tourist little tour of all these places. This is when Maria sings the song "I Have Confidence," and she's kind of singing about having confidence and then kind of being clumsy, falling all over the place. And this is like the contradiction of Maria that I find to her so endearing. When she gets to the house, she's immediately struck by its grandeur. It's this big mansion that's so beautiful. And Maria is, she's taken, she's given up all her clothes to the poor and she lives very minimally. She's trying to be a nun, so she's trying to live through God. And then she sees this like complete opulence and is like blown away. So she comes to the door and she meets the captain, who is incredibly, incredibly serious and is actually raising his children with military like precision and with the absence of play. And he actually has a whistle as though he still is an officer and calls his children. Each child has a specific tone. So you see all the kids march out and march down the stairs. And he says the iconic line, Von Trapp children don't play, they march. So the kids all introduce themselves to Maria. And then this is this little thing that I love. He says this to Maria. Now, when I want you, this is what you will hear. And he blows a specific whistle pattern. And Maria says, oh, no, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I could never answer to a whistle. Whistles are for dogs and cats and other animals, but not for children, and definitely not for me. It would be too humiliating. Captain Von Trapp says, Fraulein, were you this much trouble at the Abbey? Maria, much more, sir. Captain Von Trapp, And he starts to walk away from Maria. And Maria blows the whistle hard. And she said, excuse me, sir, but I don't know your signal. So that starts a cheeky back and forth. Like Maria's like very funny, very, very cheeky, very fun. And Captain Von Trapp is like having none of this. Like he is not impressed with Maria. So the kids have no play, and there's a lot of criticism of Maria's one dress and clothes. So Captain Von Trapp insists that Maria actually makes her own new clothes, and so he buys her a new fabric. They also are replacing all the new drapes in her room. Maria's like, this is ridiculous. Like, I don't need new drapes. These drapes are perfectly fine. So this first night we see Liesel sneak out with her boyfriend, and they sing that song 16 going on 17. And we learned through the conversations that Liesel's quite in love and she's like wanting to pursue like marriage. And this is a person she wants to settle down with, which is crazy because she's 16. I wasn't even ready to settle down at like 25. I mean, I was with my husband, but I just wasn't there. I still don't think anybody should get married before 25 if your brain isn't fused yet. That's just my opinion. If you got married at like 20 and you're happy still, like good for you. I think you're the exception, not the rule. But there's the talk of Anschluss from this boy and basically saying that they need to accept that this is happening. But Liesel isn't really like understanding or paying attention to this, but this is a bit of foreshadowing. So as they're out there, a thunderstorm breaks out and it begins to pour rain. And Liesel sneaks in through the window, and it just happens to be Maria's window. And Maria catches her, and she decides that she's going to try to earn Liesel's trust by hiding her and getting her to her room and not telling Captain Von Trapp. But all the children begin to bust into Maria's room kind of one at a time because they're afraid of this thunderstorm. And then eventually the captain comes in and he's like, what is going on here? I said bedtime was this time. And Maria's like, well, there's thunderstorms. And because Maria has now stood up for Liesel and kind of stood up for the children, she earns the children's trust. They pull a little bit of antics on her, such as putting a pine cone on her chair and a few things. But they eventually like come around on her, and she teaches them to develop a love of music. She teaches them how to sing. They go on a lot of adventures up in the mountains. The captain decides that he's going to go to Vienna to visit his girlfriend Elsa, who's the Baroness. And Maria decides this is her opportunity to teach the kids how to play. And so she uses the fabric of the old drapes and makes them all play clothes. The captain then returns with the Baroness or Elsa and their mutual friend Max. And given that she's a baroness, she is on the like kind of higher end aristocracy of the Austria. And after they get back and, the captain's kind of wanting to introduce the children to Elsa for the first time. He's wanting to kind of make a good impression. He sees them coming back. They're on a boat with Maria, and the boat capsizes, and the kids are in play clothes, and they get into an argument because the captain's not impressed that Maria's done this after he's strictly forbidden it. Captain Von Trapp, is it possible? Could I have just imagined? Have my children by any chance been climbing trees? Yes, Captain. Captain Von Trapp. I see. Well, may I ask, where did they get these? Maria says, play clothes? Captain Von Trapp says, oh, is that what you call them? Maria says, I made them from the drapes that used to hang in my bedroom. Captain Von Trapp, drapes? Maria, they still have plenty of wear left, and the children have been everywhere in them. Captain Von Trapp, do you mean to tell me that my children have been roaming through Schlossberg dressed up in nothing but some old drapes? Maria, and having a marvelous time. And then Maria, children can't do all the things they're supposed to do if they have to worry about spoiling precious clothing. Captain Von Trapp, they haven't complained yet. Maria, well, they wouldn't dare. They love you too much. They fear you too much. Captain Von Trapp, I do not wish to discuss my children in this manner. Maria, well, you've got to hear it from someone. You've never home long enough to get to know them. Captain Von Trapp, I said I don't want to hear it any more from you about my children. Maria, I know you don't, but you've got to. Now take Liesel. Captain Von Trapp, you will not say one word about Liesel, Fraulein. Maria, she's not a child anymore, and one of these days, she's going to wake up and she's going to be a woman, and you won't even know her. And Friedrich, he's a boy, but he wants to be a man, and there's no one to show him how. Captain Von Trapp, don't you dare tell me about my son. Maria, and Brigitta could tell you about him if you let her get it close to you. She knows everything. Captain Von Trapp, Fraulein, Maria, and Kurt pretends he's tough and not to show he's hurt when you brush him aside. Captain Von Trapp, that will do. Maria, and the way you do all of them. Louisa, I don't even know about yet. Captain Von Trapp, I said that will do. Maria, but somebody has to find out about her, and the little ones just want to be loved. Oh, please, Captain, love them all. Captain Von Trapp, I don't care to hear anything further about you or my children. Maria, I'm not finished yet, Captain. Captain Von Trapp says, oh, yes, you are, Captain. He pauses. Fraulein. And that's just this, very intense argument. And the kids kind of run into the house, and the Baroness and Max follow. And as the captain and Maria are having this argument, it sort of moves into the house, and he's wanting to fire Maria. And as they're walking in, they hear music. And Maria said, I've done this. I've taught them. I wanted them to impress Elsa with the song. And the captain hears and is incredibly moved and is overcome with emotion and tears up and sings with his kids for the first time in years and years and years since before his wife died. And as though I don't understand the death of a spouse, I still have mine, but I do understand extended depression that affects your children. I've been honest on here when we talked about, or I've talked about it, about my pretty severe postpartum depression and psychosis that really impacted the first year of my daughter being born, where I felt a lot of difficulty in connecting due to my severe depression. And so I related a lot to the captain. In this moment, I think sometimes it is harder for parents to connect, and we don't talk about it a lot, especially, a father at this point in history would have not the same connection. Being a widower, at this time we don't see a lot of single fathers. So this scene moved me quite deeply, and I really identified with the captain, sort of having this moment where all of a sudden he feels a lot more warm. So he then thanks Maria for bringing music back into the house, and kind of all is forgiven. Max, their friend, is incredibly impressed with the children singing, and he wants to enter them into the Salzburg festival, but the captain refuses, not wanting his children to sing in public. Not sure why. I feel like he thinks it reflects badly on them. I don't know how this could possibly be true. The Baroness and Captain Von Trapp want to give a party. They kind of want to introduce Elsa as this more official kind of girlfriend. They're very much considering marriage. This is a big deal. It's a very serious relationship. And so they decide to throw this big party. It's got the, upper aristocracy of Austria, and sort of a lot of their friends and from both Vienna and locally have come over. The captain, who very much opposes Anschluss, has a Austrian flag proudly displayed. Now Elsa has connections within the Nazi party. So there are Nazi officers present, and this is including a character called Herr Zeller, or Harzeller. I'm gonna go with Herr Zeller. I don't really know how to pronounce it. Sorry, guys. Air. I think it's Air. We talked about this with the Nosferatu episode. If you listened to that, it was Air Knock. So this is Herr Zeller. He's not impressed with the displaying of an Austrian flag. This guy is obviously very pro-annexing of Austria, and they have this great exchange. Perhaps those who would warn you that the onslaught is coming, and it is coming, they would get further with you by setting their words to music. Captain von Trapp. If the Nazis take over Austria, I have no doubt, Herr Zeller, that you will be the entire trumpet section. Herr Zeller, you flatter me, Captain. Captain. Captain says, how clumsy of me. I meant to accuse you. And so this very much sets up that, like, the captain is not going to take this invasion of his country and the annexing of his country lightly. He doesn't support it, and he's vocal about it, which a lot of people at the time are very scared to be, because the Nazis are obviously now, hindsight 2020, a scary motherfucking group of people with fucking horrific ideals. And so it's very important to remember, not everybody in history was like under like this cloak of like ignorance about what the Nazis were doing. They were clear, and people did not support it. Much like we see in modern times with some of the rhetoric that Donald Trump is saying, and a lot of the far right wing parties that we're seeing kind of crop up everywhere, where they're exceptionally anti-trans and anti-immigrant and like to blame a lot of economic downfallings on these minority groups. Don't forget that this is how the Nazis gained power. Is they were able to shift the blame and saying, we're the only ones that can solve these problems. It's these people's fault. Except for right now, it's not the Jews and the Soviets like they blamed in the rise of the Nazi party. It's immigrants and trans people that are the scapegoats in modern times. Don't be confused that this is different. Don't sit under that cloak of ignorance. It's the same. It's the same pattern. Is the right wing in Canada and the US going to take it as far as a Nazi party? Time will tell, depending on how we react and, how things are going. But these are dog whistles, guys. These are dog whistles. And I think this is a very important film because it shows those early onsets of both what you can do and stand up for and, warning you about what happens when you don't. Because now we know in hindsight what the Nazis are capable of. But we are allowing, a lot of us, for history to repeat itself. So these are dog whistles, guys, from these right-wing parties. Don't be confused. And although the parties that are in power, a lot of the moderate or left parties, are perfect, what they aren't spewing is hate. And that's important to remember, particularly if you're Canadian and you're wandering into a voting booth this month. Remember, there's only one party that supports horrible things about trans people. There's only one. There's one party that has members that deny residential schools. One. You don't know who I vote for by me saying I don't support that, but you sure as fuck know who I don't. Okay, so while this is happening, the adults are dancing in the ballroom, and Maria's dancing outside with the children. She's teaching them traditional Austrian folk dancing. It's very cute because she's one of the smaller boys, and she can't quite get around, and she's having to both kind of lead the dance and be the supporting character. It's so cute. It's very heartwarming. And the captain sees this, and he kind of interjects and dances with Maria, and they do a beautiful job. And at the end, they kind of embrace, and like Maria immediately kind of backs off and is like taken aback by this. She immediately gets super embarrassed, goes beet red, because there is this like sudden realization from both parties, but particularly Maria, that Maria's fallen in love with the captain. She feels this deep connection with her because obviously not only is this her job, so it like affects that, but Maria's about to take her vows as a nun, and she's now having feelings for a man. And you're taking a vow to God. You don't have intimate relationships with men as a nun. So she kind of goes red and leaves and goes to her room because they're gonna, the children are gonna go to bed, and she's gonna come back down for dinner, and she needs to find something to wear. So Elsa has witnessed all of this and picks up that the captain's obviously very attracted to Maria. And so she goes to help, in quotations, Maria pick out something to wear. And she kind of points out that the captain's attracted to Maria and sort of encourages Maria to leave and go back to the Abbey. She doesn't do it in a very harsh way, but she definitely is like trying to elbow Maria out, which in all fairness to Elsa, like that's her guy. Like I would be like, who is this girl? You know? And this film also kind of makes me think about The Nanny. I don't know if anybody watched that show in the 90s. This like little dynamic is very like Cece and Fran. I don't know. So Maria decides she has no choice but to leave because she can't A, fall in love with a man at all, and B, Maria is very sweet and she doesn't want to get in the way of Elsa and the captain. She doesn't want to be that person. So then Elsa goes back to the party and she shares a toast with Max about what has happened. As the guests are dining in the neighboring room, Maria leaves quietly and goes back to the Abbey without saying goodbye. So then we have the intermission, as all good long movies do in classic cinema. We have the actual intermission music, which I love. So Act Two opens up in the Van Trapp house, and the Baroness is trying to play with the children and connect with them, but she just isn't getting the games. And the kids miss Maria. The kids we're starting to feel like very motherly feelings towards Maria, in real connection with her, and the way that they do not feel with the Baroness. Although to the Baroness's credit, she's not trying to be some sort of evil witch stepmother and push the kids out. She very much wants the kids to like her. And as somebody who has step-parents, one of which who took off after like 14 years without saying goodbye, and then now I have the privilege of having two step parents, Mike, who is like the sweetest man alive and has always made a huge effort, and Christine, who has been my stepmom since high school and always makes an effort, both of which I feel like if anything happened with my parents, like they would always make an effort. So we love a step parent who tries. We love it. So shout out to those two for trying hard always. So the children decide they're going to sneak off to visit Maria, and this comes shortly after the news that Elsa and the captain are engaged. And so they sneak off, they go to the abbey, they are turned away by the nuns who say that Maria is in seclusion. So during her seclusion, she's confessing to Mother Abbess that she is in love with the captain and she is feeling a way she has never felt before. Mother Abbess tells Maria that loving a man is part of God's work too, and that she must live the life she was born to live. So basically, Mother Abbess says, I see this, and you have permission to go. And you're not a bad person. You're not a bad Catholic. You still can live in the way God wants you to. And it doesn't have to look like the way you thought it did when you were a kid. And this sort of dream of being a nun. Maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you found a dream along the way with equal value. So she decides she's going to return to the captain, and she follows suit. The children at this point sneak back and get caught by their father, who totally knows where they've been. But they sort of have this lying, they sort of lie to him and say that they picked berries, and he's, trying to catch them saying, like, where are your steams in your hands? Where are the berries? So he knows, and he's sort of teasing them and says, well, if you're so full of berries, you're not going to get any dinner. But of course he relents because he knows they went to visit Maria. Maria then returns and the children tell her about the news of their father's engagement. Maria is devastated but doesn't say anything, and then basically tells Elsa and Captain that she'll just stay on as governess until they find someone else, and then she'll go back to the Abbey and take her vows because she doesn't want to interfere with this. She doesn't want to step in the middle. She doesn't want to be that kind of person. Like, Marie is a very, very good person with very, very strong morals, and that's very clear. So that evening, Elsa finds the captain on the balcony and notices that he's admiring Maria. And this is where she realizes the captain is not in love with her. He's in love with Maria. And she approaches him and they have a conversation where he admits that he does have feelings for Maria. And she says, I don't think we should get married. And so she calls off the engagement and goes back to Vienna. And she's incredibly gracious about this in a way I would not be. Holy fuck, would I lose my shit if this was the case? The captain goes down to find Maria, and he says, Maria, there isn't going to be a baroness anymore. Maria says, I don't understand. The captain says, well, we called off our engagement, you see. And Maria says, oh, I'm sorry. Captain Von Trapp says, you are? Maria says, you did? The captain says, yes. Well, you can't marry someone when you're in love with someone else, can you? And they sing a song that gets me. I'll just read the lyrics too because it's really beautiful and I think it really sums up when you've been through hard times and then you find the person that kind of makes it all better. And the song is Something Good. Perhaps I had a wicked childhood, perhaps I had a miserable youth, but something in my wicked, miserable past, there must be a moment of truth. For here you are standing there loving me, whether you should or not. So something in my youth or childhood, I must have done something good. Nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. So somewhere in my youth and childhood, I must have done something good. For here you are standing there loving me, whether or not you should. So somewhere in my youth and my childhood, I must have done something good. Nothing comes from nothing, and nothing ever could. So somewhere in my youth or childhood, I must have done something good. So they get married at the Abbey. Maria wears this horrible veil/hat, but I digress. Julie Andrews too beautiful, but I hate this hat veil thing she wears. And so they go away to their honeymoon. So Max, kind of behind the back, enters the Von Trapp children in the Schlossberg Festival. He's very proud of them and thinks they're beautiful singers and thinks the world should hear them. And while Maria and the captain are on their honeymoon, Austria is annexed by the Third Reich and they come home immediately. Captain Von Trapp gets home and he rips down a Nazi flag that's been hung up because the Von Trapp family was the only one still flying the Austrian flag. And I think this is the hottest a man's ever been, is he rips down a Nazi flag and then rips it in half. That's peak masculinity. Not buckling to fascism is peak masculinity and peak attractiveness in my mind. So Liesel's boyfriend then comes over and he's now a member of the Nazi army. And he delivers a letter. He delivers it to Liesel and says to pass it on to her father. And she's trying to talk to him about their relationship. And he says, I'm now occupied with more important matters. And your father better be too if he knows what's good for him. And so Captain Von Trapp then opens the letter and it's an order for him to report to the German naval base for his service. Captain Von Trapp is absolutely unwilling to compromise and it goes against everything that's his beliefs. And, he says, they've been offered me a commission. I've been requested to accept immediately and report to the naval base at Birmingham tomorrow. Marie says, I knew this would happen and I didn't think it would be so soon. The captain says, to refuse them would be fatal for all of us and joining them would be unthinkable. And so they decide they're going to have to flee to neighboring Switzerland that night specifically for their own safety because they're not going to be a part of the Nazi movement. And so we switch to a scene where they push their car in the driveway neutral, so it's not heard by staff. So A, they don't alert anyone, or B, they're not credible witnesses to anything. And as they get to the bottom of the driveway, it's the children and Max and the captain and Maria. Arizeller is waiting for them. And he said, and he's going to escort them personally to the captain's posting. And he says, I'm not asking you where you and your family are going, nor have you asked me why I'm here. In Captain Von Trapp says, well, apparently we're both suffering from a deplorable lack of curiosity. So the Airzoller knows that they're trying to escape. And sort of thinking on his feet, Max displays the program that he's had sitting in his pocket of the festival, showing that the Von Trapp singers are supposed to be there. They had no plans of actually going to do this, but it's this quick cover that happens. So good call, Max, on signing them up for that. So Arizella understands what's going to happen. He says he's going to escort them as soon as the show is done because he needs to immediately be joining the Third Reich. And so at the show, Captain sings Adelweiss, which is a song he sang earlier to his children. And it's announced that he's going to be escorted off as soon as the concert is over. He's announced the crowd. Maria then leads the Von Trapp family in another song. And one by one, they sort of escape off stage after their parts are over. And then Max takes the stage to sort of announce some of the prizes, and then the show will be over. And all of the Von Trapp families have now escaped, and they head to the Abbey for shelter. But the Nazi soldiers find them, and they are swarming the ground as the Von Trapp family is in hiding. It's actually Liesel's boyfriend that discovers their hiding spot. And so there's kind of this standoff or face off with the captain as we're seeing Liesel's boyfriend, the gears turning on his head about whether or not he's going to, blow his whistle and reveal the Von Trapp family and basically sentence them to death, or he's going to escape with them and go into the mountains and go, stand up for what is right and, not buckle to this Nazi regime. The captain says, you'll never be one of them. And instead of this connecting with Liesel's boyfriend, it enrages him and he blows the whistle and says, they're here. And the Von Trapp family escapes just before the officers kind of catch them. And so they, get in their car and they drive off quickly. And then the officers are to get in their car and they're trying to start their car and they can't. And then we kind of pan over to the nuns and it's revealed by the nuns saying, "Forgive me, Mother, for I have sinned." And there's like essential car parts kind of tucked under their habits, so the Von Trapp family can escape. And they do. And the last shot is them climbing over the mountains and escaping to Switzerland as Maria knows the mountains like the back of her hand and she helps them escape. And that is the end of the movie. So I'm going to end this movie with a quote that I think is more relevant now than it ever has been. And this is, the discussion with Max and the captain about the oncoming onslaughts. And Max says, "What's going to happen will happen. Just make sure it doesn't happen to you." And Captain Von Trapp says, "Don't you ever say that again." And Max says, "I have no political convictions. Can I help it if others do?" Captain Von Trapp says, "Oh, yes, you can help it. And you must." So I'll leave you with that. Happy Thursday, everyone.